All right, everybody. I'm sorry. I just hit record, so I'm going to just start the PowerPoint again. It's a review, so it's okay to do it again. So let me go back. Um, right. So we have the climate. We talked about it. We talked about Annalise, and she's a writer and she's young. Fairly young. She's this year. I guess she'll be 30 this year, and she's got a master's of fine arts. And she runs this digital platform. Right. We just read the poem and looked at the poem together as well, and essentially it's talking about how the poem takes a figurative approach to defining the climate crisis while also using easy to understand language. So Gelman clearly depicts the foreboding nature of humanity's future in the form of a wave, right? And then we started talking about the themes, right? Nature and humans, right? The connection of the ocean, the beach, and the sky in relationship to people, in connection to people, how we relate to it, how we interact to it. Like we're there in this sense that nature is a place that we go to for relaxing. There's a place that we go to have a connection with, right? The environment, right? The idea of safety and dangerous. The environment is both safe and dangerous. That beach, it's a metaphor, it's a symbol, right? For it's safe right now. People are laying in the sun, they're putting suntan lotion, they're reading books, there's sand that people are playing with, it's heaped and tunneled. I mean, somebody is manipulating and touching the sand. So there's all these suggestions of safety, right? And we know as the poem progresses that same scene becomes the dangerous one, also because of the environment, and also because of nature. And it goes back to the next bullet point, which is the threat of climate change and global warming, right? That there is a threat, there is a coming threat of the climate change and global warming propose, right? Um, and sometimes it's so far out there, right, that we can't see it. So it's a threat. So it's not real. It's not here. It's not right now in certain aspects, but it's there. It's coming. So the idea of the threat as a theme of climate change and global warming. So, and this is the idea of work versus leisure. The idea of that. So it is work. Like I'm working right now. I get up, I showered, I changed, I prepared, I put on a shirt, and I come and I teach my class, right? And I get that's the work that I do and leisure. I went to a nice lunch on the weekend, and that's my chill time. So this work and leisure that way, but this also work and leisure meaning like if we know this threat is coming, like what is the work? How we work? How are we dealing with it? Right? Are we actively working to do something about it, or are we taking our time? Right? Are we being leisurely around dealing with these issues of global warming and climate change? Right? And so again, this goes to the idea of the concept of urgent versus important, right? To what do we pay attention, right? Things that are urgent, right? So in the poem, she talks about that little child that was drowning and they bring him to the shore. Suddenly that activity, that action becomes urgent. You got to deal with it now. The wave that's way in the distance, I don't got to deal with that wave yet because it's so far away. But the child at the shore, boom, we got to deal with that child, right? And then the idea of leisure are important, like that wave is important, right? But when do we give it the attention, right? When do we give it the attention it needs? It needs it now, but it doesn't feel urgent, right? So the idea of urgent versus important, like what do we pay attention to? What do we see? And then the last thing I'm going to list here, and if you think of any others, we can also add them, is the idea of change and negligence, right? But there is change. Like the whole scene changes from the beginning to the poem to the end, right? The beginning, it's like a wave that's far away. People are chilling. At the end, the wave comes to the shore like a tsunami and like basically wipes everything out, right? Um, so the idea of change and the idea of negligence is basically ignoring things, right? So if you don't deal with it right at the moment, you got to say, I got to get to it. But is climate change the kind of thing? Is it urgent right now, right? Is it, or can we wait, right? So these are some of the themes. Like we've done with every poem this semester, we can look at the themes and we can probably pull out some more themes. But these are some of the big themes, right? And then, so we talked about an article, right? It was Climate Change and Global Warming. It was I put a real and distant threat, right? But in the publication Inside Climate Change, right? Audrey Bray, and that's the woman, writes in an article discussing global warming. And of course, there's a hyperlink in You can always click and then go to the full article. But this is the article this person Audrey wrote, um, and here's how it begins. It was a weird place for a late midlife crisis, Disneyland 2002. And it was a weird kind of crisis too, because it had little to do with longing or regret or any fear of aging. Masria's awakening was highly rational, backed up with data, and powerfully prescient. It was the exact crisis many of us are having today. He figured out, all alone in Anaheim hotel room at the age of 61, that climate change was coming to kill. In Annalise's Gelman 2019 poem, The Climate, she imagines a half-drowned child who's just been pulled to shore. Everyone on the beach is rapt, watching the kid, hoping to see a breath, this genuine emergency, while before them all rises a tsunami-sized wave. And she puts the excerpt. The one was, of course, warned it would come, and soon the shadow of that wave like a new sky already overhead and even now descending, right? This is the last four lines of the poem, right? So this little excerpt is talking about this person named Ed Masria, who is dealing with the issue of climate change. And he's trying to figure it out because he's saying that he feels climate change was coming to kill, right? Kind of like what Annalise is saying in her poem, right? That out there, there's a wave and it's going to come and kill us. But what she does is she brings us the child who's just been pulled ashore, and everybody is attention is wrapped. That means it's a focus. Oops, it's focused on the child, right? And so, and hoping, right, to see the child breathe something, they consider that a genuine emergency, something that needs attention immediately, right? While before them, all rises a tsunami-sized wave, right? So while their attention is focused on the child, on whatever's urgent at that moment, whatever feel needs to be done, when they aren't looking at the wave, right? When they aren't paying attention to the wave, boom, that's when the wave comes and wipes everything out, right? So literary devices inside of it. We could talk about many, but let's talk about simile and metaphor, right? So the wave that Gelman speaks of are the
Professor, excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt. Are you trying to share your screen?
oh yeah, is it not shared?
No, it's not sharing. I know I came a little late, but
Let's see. So all the while you've just been seeing me talk.
well, I've been listening, so
No, I'm
it's the
saying
same thing.
all of you. Anyway, here's the PowerPoint. I'm like off. The last day game I should be on the most, and I'm off. But here we go. So let's go back to whoops. So yes, I'm going over the different slides of the PowerPoint. So I just talked about this. This is the excerpt from the article, right? Saying it was weird for a place for a midlife crisis, but this is um, the um, environmentalist Ed Masria thinking about the idea that the climate was change was coming to kill, right? That's what he said, and he uses this excerpt from the poem with Annalise Gelman's poem that we're studying. That what was happening is that while our attention is on the child, our attention is on the immediate issue, the genuine emergency, he said. Like, that's a real emergency. That child, we got to see. Everything depends on that child. Children are the future. That child can't die, right? While focus is there, meanwhile, that tsunami that we saw, that wave way out in the ocean that we were warned about, is now here. And now we're all going to be decimated for not paying attention to something for which we were warned about. So, talking about the literary devices in simile and metaphor, right, are them. And we've talked about simile and metaphor. It's about comparison to representation, right? And simile is using the word like. So the wave that Gelman is speaking at the top of the poem is a simile, right? A simile is when you use like or as to symbolize something. So she writes, it was like watching a wave. So the wave is actual, but more representational of danger or freak of nature, right? So a wave, you've been at the beach, so the waves are big or small, but in this case, the wave is representing danger or like a freak of nature, like the giant wave, the tsunami, right? Those are tsunamis are not normal. Something happens in nature. An earthquake happens, you know, in the ocean, and plates shift, and a giant wave gets created off of that. So the beach is a metaphor as well, right? The metaphor is a figure of speech in which a word or phrase can be applied to an object, and something is something. So the beach represents life, right? It represents leisure, represents distraction, it represents safety. So there's lots of things the beach represents. Let me just check the chat. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, Ellen, that's fine to the two popcorn. Um, Right, so we're able to talk about this poem about these themes, but inside of the themes is also the simile and metaphor, right? There's also symbols. There's lots of symbolism, right? The wave in the beach is a symbol, right? It's a symbol of the warning, right? It's a symbol of destruction. It's a symbol of climate change itself, right? Um, the beach, right? We talked about how the beach also represents safety, but also danger, right? The beach represents leisure, taking your time, right? Taking the time, relaxing, not attending to, not working, right? She says, not working when you're at the beach, right? So it represents all those things. The book, like, and she talks about a book, right? The book symbolizes leisure and relaxing. Books, as we know, also symbolize knowledge, right? So there's a juxtaposition of knowledge and ignorance, right? And ignorance, if you hear of ignorance and the word ignorance, there's like ignore. So that's part of it. There's something about intentionally not knowing or intentionally not wanting to deal with, right? The blanched page, he talks about that, right? The sun making a page is so bright. And it's that again, that parallel between the sun is wonderful, but sometimes it's so bright, it brightens the page and I can't see it, right? The horizon itself, right? Where the sun meets the sky. You know, that's where the warning is coming from the horizon, which seems so far away, right? So that's one. The drowned child is another one, right? Another symbol, like the symbol, brown child, drowned, the child symbolizes hope, symbolizes the future, symbolizes an emergency, a genuine emergency. You know, everyone's knee-jerk reaction should be to protect children, you know, so the child has all those symbols. And then even they compare the child to a balloon, and balloons are symbols, a symbol as well of like, you know, just think, you know, like you all know I just had a birthday, so balloons were there. So balloons are part of celebration. Balloons have air inside of them, they rise, you know, if you put helium in them. But the balloon is that. Balloons are part of parties, right? Balloons are associated very often with children. You know, a little kid walking in the zoo with a balloon or something is something that is considered um, you know, that's you know what they symbolize. And this is the PowerPoint, right? So we have these elements, right? We know a little bit about Annalise. You know, there's the poems. You can click it and see the poem with with her reading it, the reading in it. Understanding that it's um, basically a figurative approach to defining the climate crisis while also using easy to understand language, but she's takes the foreboding nature of humanity's future in terms of a wave, right? But she's basically, it's a figurative approach to talk about climate change. Then we talked about these themes: nature and human, the environment, the threat of climate change and global warming, work versus leisure. All of these ideas are inside of it. And then we have climate change, you know, this kind of moment of this person, the idea of peril, right? The idea of threat, the idea of climate change killing, right? There's certainly death, and there's certainly ominous that ending of the poem when she says, she writes here at the very end that though one was, of course, warned it would come, and soon the shadow of that wave is like a sky already overhead and even now descending, right? While everyone's attention is on the child, the wave kind of appears and takes over, right? And then literally simile and metaphor we went through, the symbols in there, and that's it. So this PowerPoint, you know, this kind of summary, I'm going to add um, to Blackboard. So you'll have it just in case if, you know, today you'll listen to it. I know I was going to get all those lessons up, but I'll get them all up today. Um, yes, I could do that today. I mean, I think I have them all converted. I just have to put them in the Blackboard. So they're converted into YouTube videos. So, so you'll have that. You'll have all of this stuff. You have the last three classes. You'll have today's class. You'll have the PowerPoint. You'll have, you know, the poem, of course, you know, as all tools to help you craft essay, the final exam essay. So the last thing I will do with that is I'm going to, so I'm going to share my screen again. And thanks again, Christian, for allowing me, because I'm sitting here, blah, 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 and I'm thinking that you're seeing what I'm seeing. But thanks for letting me know. So let's see, yes. Yes, okay. So this is kind of like a fake question, right? It's not the question, but this is what your final exam prompt is going to look like, right? It'll look similar to this, right? And at the beginning, you're going to have instructions, right? And this is familiar because we did this with Ruby of Elsinore. We did this with um, the research paper, right? You had some form of instruction. So here, it's going to tell you this, and this is literally verbatim. It's going to say, answer the following exam question as to support your interpretation with evidence gained from a close reading analysis of the text, right? So that is what you've been doing, right? You're going to answer the question, and then you're going to support your questions, your ideas, right? Your answer by using a close reading of analysis of the text, right? So the information you're going to get to answer that is coming from the text, not from the universe, not from your feelings, right? It's coming from the poem, okay? Be sure to mention the author's use of literary devices such as imagery, metaphor, irony, tone, right? So it's not saying to write about imagery, metaphor, irony, and tone specifically, but it's saying that as you discuss whatever it is the question is, you're going to use these any of these um, literary devices. And operative word here, I'm going to make it bold. I'll make it big, such as, right? And that means it doesn't necessarily mean that these are them, that these are examples. So it could be more, right? It could be, simile is not there, but we talked about similes today. It could be about, any other elements that any other poetic elements. So your any poetic elements can be used, any literary devices, right? Such as, to give you an example, what they mean by literary devices. Okay. Then your final exam should be a multi-paragraph essay that follows the conventions of standard English grammar and usage, as well as MLA and text citation rules for the quotation of literary work. So first, it's going to say answer the question, right? Support it with evidence gained from the text. So you can use quotations and pull examples of what you're talking about. And then it's going to also be a multi-paragraph essay, right? That's one. And that follows the standard usage of grammar, and it's going to say as well as MLA and text citation rules, right? So that's the second thing. I'm going to make that a different color. So it's asking you to do both those things. So if you leave out the MLA and text citation, like some of you did for your drama essay, then of course that brings your grade down a little bit. So you're not following the instructions of the instructions, right? The instructions are asking you to write an essay, right? Of course, use grammar and proper grammar and usage, but also saying it's asking you to use MLA and text citation. Okay. Um, then there'll be a question, right? This is a very simplified question, right? But let's just go through the, right? So then after it gives you all this instruction, right, at the top, and we just went through them, and the thing, answer the question, use evidence from the text. You should include discussions, right? As you're discussing, mention, literary elements. And that says, and it should be a multi-paragraph essay. It doesn't tell you how many, but you should answer it like you feel like you have satisfactorily answered the question. If you want a tip, you could follow the tip we've been having all semester, and that's between 3 and 4 pages, right? So just think about that. They should be about 3 and 4 pages. If it's two, this is your final exam. It shouldn't be shorter than one of your regular essays. This should be meaty. You should be able to show, demonstrate, and put all of the um, all that you've learned this semester into this essay, right? That's what the final exam essay is about. Demonstrating your ability to, craft an essay, do it well, all the best of your ability. So here's what a sample question could look like. In the poem "The Climate" by Annalise Gelman, discuss how she uses simile and metaphor to discuss the themes of danger, right? So, so this is giving you like a little more direction than many prompts would be. But when you look at this, first of all, we know we have the poem "The Climate" by Annalise Gelman, is the poem. But the question is asking you to use simile and metaphor to discuss the theme of danger. So, um, so you would have to, or so you would have to think about like what is danger, right? What is danger in this poem, right? What are the ways danger appears in the poem? So I'm going to just take a moment to stop my screen, stop sharing. How does danger appear in the poem? Like the idea of danger. What does that look like? What is danger? What can you point to in the poem that says, oh, here's an example of danger, and here's an example of danger, here's an example of danger? Any ideas? Mute or chat it. Do it popcorn style, just unmute and say a word. What do you think is an example of danger in the poem? The tsunami. Okay, thanks, Christian. Yep. Let me go to the document. Okay. Let's see any others. Hurricanes. Okay. So I'm glad you wrote the hurricanes, um, Alan, because hurricanes are a threat, but there actually don't seem to be any hurricanes in the poem, unless you can point to something in the poem that you see as a hurricane. Climate change. All right, so Rifath, I'm going to say yes. So Alan, that was a good example, so that we can know that's what the question is asking you when it says evidence from the text. So that any examples, we have to look at the text and point to them. So climate change, I'm going to put it down, Rifath, because it is. It's harder to point to it, right? But climate change. What are other examples of danger in the poem? Any other thoughts? Yes. Okay. Great. Excellent. Let me put that down. So I'm going to share my screen again, and you can continue chatting and giving me examples when we share the screen again. So if I'm going to answer a question, right, first of all, I understand it's asking me to, right, it's asking me to um, discuss the theme of danger. So I go to the things and I'm going to make my list: tsunami, climate change, right? Somebody says drowned child, right? The symbol of danger, right? That's an example of danger. Um, I'm going to use to say you have the tsunami, right? But also just the wave itself, right? And so I'm going to make a list of right, the idea of global warming, but I'm going to put down all the things, right? And then I'm going to look for examples in the text. We know the ending of the poem has this, right? Has a tsunami, right? The climate change might be a little harder to define, so I'm going to move it down for a minute, right? But we're going to find example of that. Clearly, the drowned child is that the wave, right? In the right in the sense of a warning, right? At the beginning of the poem, you know, um, I think in terms of global warming, I would talk about how we ignore the signs. And there's the moment in the poem where they say, turn your back on the ocean, right, and the horizon. So you see what I'm doing, right, when I'm looking at the poem, right, when I'm looking at how to even, before I've even written a sentence, right, I'm going to look at the way danger appears, right, in the poem. And it's saying that she's a simile and metaphor in which to do it. So I'm like, all right, so I have at least the elements here, right, of what I'm going to say, at least, let's say the first four, right? So these four I'm going to use. So I said, all right, and now I know what I'm going to write about, right? I'm going to write one body paragraph on how the tsunami is an example of danger. I'm going to write another body paragraph on how the drowned child is an example of danger. I'm going to write about the wave as an example of danger, and I'm going to write about how global warming is. I'm going to keep these first four will be my will be the four different examples that I'm going to discuss. So then I can start crafting my thesis statement. So I have to use simile and metaphor in it. So I'm going to say, um, Gelman, after, so, the introduction, your intro paragraph, of course, will include one, the name of the poem, two, title, the author's name, three, a synopsis, right, of the poem, and four, the thesis statement, right? So the intro paragraph, at the very least, should include that. And the synopsis of the poem could be anywhere from 2 to 4 sentences, right? Describe the poem, right? So I would next start working on my thesis statement, right? Because I kind of know the thesis statement is the roadmap. And I already know that I'm going to discuss the theme of danger, and I'm using these four examples, right, as the theme of danger. So then I would go here, right? And I would say in Gelman's poem, she uses simile and metaphor to discuss or well, straight how um, a tsunami, a drowned child, wave, and global warming are okay, show danger. Right? So let's go back up for a minute. So here we go. The exam question. The poem The Climate by Annalise Gelman discuss how she uses simile and metaphor to discuss the theme of danger. So I'm like, all right, they want me to talk about danger. So I'm gonna see like what examples I can find from the text. And I came up with some, you all came up with the examples and I put them in there, right? I'm gonna just cross this out for a minute. Then I just said before I even do that, just make sure I know what the intro paragraph is, the name of the person, the name of the poem, the author's name, synopsis, right? And the thesis statement. So then the thesis is the roadmap, so I'm going to start with that. So in Gelman's poem, I put she uses simile and metaphor because that's what the question is asking us to do. How does she use it? It's going to show that she uses simile and metaphor to illustrate how a tsunami, a drowned child, a wave, and global warming show danger, right? Or say present danger. I keep saying or I can use those examples are examples of danger. So you can see, keep crafting it. And then I will begin doing my intro paragraph, right? I would say Annalise. So now I'm writing my intro. Okay. So if you see me crafting the intro, right? Let me double space it, right? Annalise Gelman's poem, The Climate. I get it done right at the beginning. So we check off one, the name of the poem, and the author's name, right? And then I'm going into my synopsis, right? Takes us to a beach where in the horizon there is a wave, right? It's a distant wave, right? So the attention and the perspective of the narrator turns to the beach where people are relaxing and doing things that people do on a beach. Then brings our attention to a child who was pulled from the ocean. While everyone is watching and watching the child, giant waves, giant wave arrives and crashes down, right? So that's kind of like what happens in the poem. You could also talk about it in a different way. You could also say Annalise poems of climate takes a look at climate change and da da da, or brings us into a world where So there's different ways to talk about it. I mean, I was just being literal there, and then I'm going to go to this thesis statement that I created, copy it, and I'm going to put it in right. In Gelman's poem, she uses simile and metaphor to illustrate how a tsunami, a drowned child, a wave, and global warming are examples of danger. Okay, I have my thesis statement in there, and then I'm going to do body paragraph one. It's going to be about and All right. Excuse me. Then body paragraph 2, right? It's going to talk about what's the second thing here. Tsunami is the first one, the drowned child, right? This paragraph 2 is going to be about the drowned child. Body paragraph number 3 is the third thing on the list, right? Body paragraph 3 will be about the tsunami. I mean, no, the wave, which is different. And then body paragraph 4 is going to be about global warming. Excuse me. And then conclusion. Excuse me. This is a little bit of the thought process that I'm sharing with you on A. First, understanding the instruction. I'm sorry, it's like some, noise. So I could add just this document onto Blackboard as well. I just don't want, let me name it class um, sample essay on lesson. All right. I just don't want you to confuse it with the actual prompt. So, the other one will literally say prompt in the title, right? But so here, so I can put this document in there for sure, you know. So yeah, so remember I started with the instructions, right? Make sure that you read them and you understand it's asking you for, to craft an essay, to use grammar, to use evidence from the text, and to include literary devices in it. Even if it doesn't ask you in the question, even if this wasn't here, right? How she discuss, you could say how she discusses danger. Um, you should be thinking of what literary devices. This question gave you two of them, but you should be thinking about it because that's what this is asking you. The instructions is asking you to use literary devices. And then you should be a multi-paragraph essay, and you should use MLA and text citation. So that's part of that too. So then I looked at the question and I read it and I said, oh, it's asking me to use metaphor and similarly, but to discuss the theme of danger. So I'm like, how does danger look like? What are examples of danger? Then I made a list. You made a list, I should say. I asked you to give me examples, and some of you came up with examples, and we created a list. And we said, we're going to make these lists. Then I built, and then I just reviewed in my brain what is the intro paragraph, has the name, the poem, the author's name, the synopsis, and the thesis statement at the very least, right? So then I started creating my thesis statement because I know that I'm going to talk about danger, and these are the 4 things I'm going to talk about. And I crafted a line. I even used language that was included in here, in here, right? In Gelman's poem, she uses simile and metaphor to illustrate how tsunami, a drowned child, a wave, and a global warming are examples of danger, right? And I didn't get that out of nowhere. I got that from doing a little bit of brainstorming and sitting down and reading the question and figuring it out. Okay. Then I began writing the intro paragraph, right? And the intro has, let's check the list, name, author, poem, synopsis, thesis, right? So here it is, author, poem, synopsis of all these sentences here, and thesis is this one here, right? And then I look at my thesis statement. The first thing I say I'm going to discuss is a tsunami. That becomes my first body paragraph. I'm going to include metaphor, simile in my discussion. I should say, and use MLA in text to identify quotes for now. Right? And so they were all, I would do this to all of them. Okay. And so body paragraph 1, right, is going to be about the tsunami because we got that here, right? I'll make this green, maybe make this a different color. right? Make it blue, right? Tsunami, tsunami, right? They match, right? They're in the same order, right? The second one is a drowned child, right? So we'll make that another color, this color, right? And that's why this one, same order, right? Let's say a wave, make it green, right? And the last one is the idea of global warming, that red, right? And then that's the fourth one. Okay, so the way you list them in your thesis statement, the body paragraphs follow, and then you would do a conclusion. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the screen. So that was just an example, like looking at an exam question and the way in which you can an approach to answering it, right? So it's different, right? In the if we were like in the classroom, you would have 2.5 hours to sit down and do it live, but you don't. You have a week. Don't wait a week. Once it's live, you can start. You can take a look at it, read it. Make sure you understand the vocabulary. What is it asking you to do, right? I'll tell you, I gave you a very simplified question because I want you, because whether the question is simplified or the question is more complicated, the process is the same. Reading the question, thinking, what is it asking me to do? Oh, it's asking me to identify, talk about the theme of danger. So let me see, what does danger look like in the poem? Here's an example. 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 All right, I got 6 examples. Do I want to talk about all six? Or do I want to talk about 3 or 4 or whatever? So then you make that decision after you've done that brainstorming. Once you decide what points you're going to talk about, now you've got the beginning. Now you've got the beginning for your thesis, right? And then you start crafting your thesis statement. And then once you've got your thesis statement, building the intro is the almost, I want to say, the easy part, right? Because name the author, name the poem, say what the poem's about, right? Imagine I'm saying it, from day one. Imagine that whoever's reading the poem has not read the poem. They're not your professor who has read the poem. They're not you or your classmates who have read the poem. Imagine that somebody who doesn't read the poem, what do you need to tell them for them to understand what you're talking about, right? What about this synopsis you have to do? So you do that, and then you make your list, you craft your thesis statement, and then once you craft your thesis statement, boom, boom, boom. You know how the body paragraphs will fall, and in it, remember, describe why the tsunami is considered dangerous. How does it look in the thing? What are the lines that show it? Right, that one is a great example. Whoever I think was whoever gave it first, right? The idea of like that wave becoming the sky, like when you look up at the sky, it covers everything you can see. Imagine that's a wall of water that you can see, knowing that wall of water eventually is going to come down, right? So you can look into each body paragraph and build it nice and juicy. Make sure you're clear what the drown, if it was a drowned child, whatever it is that you're working on, that you will give it the weight. Okay. So I will put that, what I just did on class live, I'll put that document in there so that maybe if you're looking at the video or if you want to look at the document, you can kind of see what it looks like. I gave it that name in class lesson, so don't confuse it. Don't answer this prompt as your final essay prompt because you won't get credit, you'll fail it. So you have to answer the prompt that is the prompt for this poem. So, and that document will literally say prompt, and it won't appear until midnight tonight. Then it'll be dropped into the into the final example over on Blackboard. Okay, so I'll pause. If there are any more questions or anything, um, if there are no more questions, then folks, this is it. I'm around next week. If you want to do office hours, definitely if you have a question about any of the assignments or any of the revisions or anything, certainly just send me a note and we can, set up a time. So I'll be around for the next week and a half. But I'll send you all an email with all the updated deadlines. But I want to thank you. Thanks for the semester, for being here and us trying to figure out how to continue education in this pandemic times. And hopefully next semester, if some of you are still at Ostos, My office is B514. I'll be around in and out. We can't be there all the time, but I'll be coming in and out of the office in the building. And if you need a recommendation or you need anything like that, just because our class ends, I don't imagine my students ever ending. I still will be your professor, wherever you go. So if you need recommendations, if you need advice, whatever, and if you're there after in the spring, I'll be teaching in a fun elective in the spring. And next semester, I'm teaching 100. So if any of you know folks coming to Ostos that need the kind of slower paced 110, and I'll be teaching 111, of course, next semester as well too. So let your colleagues, your friends, your students know. But it's been a pleasure. I love teaching. I love teaching all of you, and for those of you who participated and did your work, keep at it. Thank you, and we'll see you around. Okay, and I'll just stay here for a few more minutes in case people have questions.
Professor.
Yep, Stacy.
Hey, so the research paper you said is due till Sunday.
No, so the research paper was due last week, but if you haven't done it, get it done by Friday. But what I'm going to do is I'm grading them. So if you did your research paper, I'm going to grade it. Definitely by tomorrow, I'll have it all graded, and you'll have until Sunday to do a revision of the first draft of the first. So if you get, if you get a good grade and you're like, I'm good with this grade, that's fine. But if you get a grade that you say, damn it, I want to try to see if I can make it better, then you have until Sunday after I grade this first one. So if you haven't done it and you're in the middle of it and you almost finished it and you can get it in today, that'll be great, because I'll be grading today and tomorrow. So you'll still have a chance to do a revision. But if not, then you have until like, what did I say, Friday to get it done. So the research paper.
Okay. Because it was just that it was the most confusing essay for me to do, so I didn't do it because I was kind of overwhelmed.
Which one?
The research one.
Oh yeah, yeah. But it's also like 20 points, 20% of your grade, so it's important for you to do something, right? Because I think even doing a research paper that's not as good is better than getting just a flat out.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you're right, Catherine. The research, the prompt will be on tonight. At midnight, it's going to drop into the box like magic. You're welcome with that. Just responding to folks in the chat.
Professor, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you, Vivian.
Yeah. So I sent in my research paper on Tuesday, like around 4 a.m.
Okay.
But yeah, last night I checked it. You graded my research paper, and it said I never submitted. What happened there? Or I remember something. I remember it happened to someone too in our class.
I haven't graded the papers yet, so I don't know what would give you that message, but just hang out a minute and let me just check and see what is there.
Yeah, I had to resend it at 2 a.m.
Let's see, turn it in.
Yeah. I checked last night, nothing was submitted.
Yeah, I see yours. May 17th.
Yeah. I remember I did submit it on Tuesday, like the 11th.
Okay.
But I don't know why it never showed up.
Okay. Yeah, all right, but it's definitely there.
Okay.
Don't worry about it.
Is there any problem? Like,
no, don't worry
late
about
submission?
No, don't worry.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
Okay, you're welcome. Glad you got it done. So, Catherine, the course content discussions, are we going to submit it like on Turnitin? Yes, you're going to submit it on Turnitin as well, Catherine. There'll be Turnitin folder will be open as well inside of it. Any other questions? Catherine, I'm not gonna get up from this chair until I put those freaking recordings on. How's that? I'll make that promise. I'm not gonna get up from this chair. I have to, they're all converted on YouTube. I just have to put the links on into the thing. I will do that. Because Christian was asking me for that for last class. That way you have all, at least definitely the last 3 classes, because they all deal with the final. Yeah, no, it'll be on. Today's will be on. Once the class ends, just so you know, what happens is when I close the class, the Zoom automatically starts making it into an MP4 file. It takes like about 15 or 20 minutes, or maybe not that much, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And then after it makes it an MP4, then I convert it into YouTube so that everybody can access it, and then I have to post it onto Blackboard. So today's class will be as well. So while I'm posting the other ones, this class will be uploading, and then I can convert it and put it on. So you have today's.
Okay, because I don't mind not watching the other classes. I just wanted today's class.
Yeah, we'll put today's, particularly since the final exam and all that stuff. So I'll make sure today's class is on it.
Okay. I also had another question, but it's not related to this class. I kind of just only needed like an advice. But it's like a work advice in a way.
Let me just let me stop recording.